Good evening, everyone. I think we've got a solid critical mass of participants. Thank you all for joining. And as things go, more people will connect up in the next couple of minutes. But we have a really full program for this meeting, so I think we should go ahead and get started. This is a public workshop focusing on the Urban Water Management Plan update. And it is a workshop that is being hosted by the Santa Clarita Valley Water Agency, known as SCV Water for short. And this is the first of 3 public workshops for the Urban Water Management Plan update. And we'll talk more about that when we get into later into the meeting this evening. So thanks again for joining. We really appreciate you spending your time with us to provide your input about this really important plan that's being worked on right now. I want to let you know that we're recording the workshop, and one of the primary reasons is we're going to be posting the recording on the website so that those who couldn't make the workshop this evening will still have the opportunity to check out and get the information. This is the agenda for our workshop this evening, and we have several presentations, and we broke the presentations into pieces, and after each one we'll have a Q&A session. And the way we're going to do the Q&A is similar to other SCV Water public meetings, where people will be able to type questions into the chat box, and then we'll take the questions and answer them live here during the workshop. But importantly, you see here on the agenda that there's an input question. And so we also have a portion of the workshop this evening where we're going to be asking some input from you all. So it's more than just Q&A. So let me just review the topics that will be addressed in the presentation. So the first will be, what is an urban water management plan? We want to give you the quick overview of the who, why, what, and where of an urban water management plan, and why SCV Water is updating it, and why is it important. And then we're going to start going into some of the components of an urban water management plan, starting with water supply characteristics and then climate change considerations. In addition to the input question, we have a couple of fun pop quiz questions built into the presentations too. So, so watch out for those. And when we get to the input question, just to give you just a preview of what we're going to be asking, the input question we have for you is, what are the types of questions, topics, issues, and ideas that you want to see the project team consider as part of the Urban Water Management Plan update? So you don't have to remember that right now. I just wanted to plant the seed for that. And then when we wrap up, we're going to report back on what we heard on that input question, and then talk about upcoming involvement opportunities, and then we will adjourn for the evening. I want to introduce you to the project team. Sarah Fleury is the project manager for the Urban Water Management Plan update. She will be moderating and playing a big role in the Q&A as well as in presentations. I'm Joan Isaacson, again, the facilitator and helping with the public involvement program. We have Katrina Paez. She's with Kennedy Jenks. She's one of the engineers who is working with the agency on this project. And then Lauren Everett, who also will be helping with presentations and Q&A. So the project team that you're seeing today is a subset of a larger team. On this slide, you see the various consultants that are working with the agency on this. It's a very technical planning process and addresses a lot of different topics, and you're going to hear about that. And so that's why the agency has pulled together a really strong team of very experienced professionals to get this done. I'm going to just give you an overview. Many of you know this, but just for some context, SCV Water is a water agency that is located in mostly LA County and provides water services to the Santa Clarita Valley area. And on this next slide, you'll see a closer in map. It is a newer agency that is formed of 3 predecessor water districts that had been working together for a long time but had their own governance. And as a unified agency, now the governance is unified, and which provides a lot of opportunities for more efficient policies and programming, and you'll see that in what we're going to talk about this evening. It's a big agency. It serves about 230,000 customers. One of the things I want to report on to you is this is a really exciting time for SCV Water. There's this convergence of planning activities that's happening, and it goes back to this. One of the reasons why this is such an opportunity is because as a unified agency, the agency can really tackle some of these plans and make some really important progress in looking at the future. And so because SCV Water recognizes that that all of these plans need public input and public involvement, we've made it as easy as possible, we hope, for community members like you to stay plugged in and be involved in these different planning processes. So there's the Groundwater Sustainability Plan, the Urban Water Management Plan, which we're talking about this evening, Water Shortage Contingency Plan, Recycled Water Planning, Rate Case Planning, and then PFAS. And so what we've done is kind of like a one-stop shopping approach, so to say, where we've created a dashboard on the website, and that looks like what you're seeing on the screen right now. So when you go to the dashboard, you could just click on whichever plan you're interested in to learn more. And especially important, we hope is going to be helpful, is to make it as easy as possible for you to participate, is we are going to be combining the communications out to the community and customers about the public involvement opportunities in a coordinated way. So rather than you getting separate emails about meetings for these different projects, we're going to be sending out coordinated emails that will tell you which meetings for which projects are on the near horizon. So we hope that that's effective, and it creates more opportunity for more people to be involved in these important planning processes. And you can see the website for the dashboard there on the bottom of the screen, www.yourscvwater.com planning. To start, we're gonna jump now to focusing more on the Urban Water Management Plan update, and the team has worked hard to create a short video that gives a real high-level view of what this specific plan is all about. And we're gonna roll with that. It's about 2 or 3 minutes in length.
You turn on the faucet, and out comes water for drinking, cooking, cleaning, and outdoor irrigation. Each of our residential customers uses about 112 gallons of water every day. But did you ever wonder how your Santa Clarita Valley Water Agency makes sure that you and our almost 275,000 customers have water for today and tomorrow? With good planning, of course. It's called the Urban Water Management Plan, and the state of California requires urban water suppliers, like SCV Water, to update it every 5 years. This update will include several major topics that all contribute to good, clean, reliable water today and tomorrow. We will forecast how much water we need to serve current and future customers, as well as plan for growth. We'll assess our water supply from local sources, especially groundwater and imported sources outside of Santa Clarita, taking into account state regulations and planning requirements. We'll update plans to recycled water and conservation programs. And we'll explore the potential effects of climate change, drought, and water shortages, plus what we can do to ensure a steady water supply for our customers. That's why we're taking steps to make sure that when you turn on the faucet, you always have clean, reliable water. With good planning, the Santa Clarita Valley will have reliable, clean water for today and tomorrow. Visit yourscvwater.com to learn more about our Urban Water Management Plan update and how you can get involved.
Excellent. Thanks so much to the team who helped put that together. That video is posted on the website. So if you know people who are interested, let them know. Just go to the website, go to the dashboard, and then click on the Urban Water Management Plan update, and then it'll be really quick to find the video. One thing I want to mention is in this type of virtual meeting platform, we're a little bit more limited in the dialogue we can have with community members, and we have good functionality with Q&A and the chat box and all of that. but we still recognize that participants, like all of you who've joined us, you may not have those same opportunities to voice your perspectives and everything that you want to share during this type of meeting platform. And so what we have done is we've created an online portal that it's a very short questionnaire. There's just, I think, like maybe 4 or 5 questions on it. And so after the meeting, if you want to go to the website, and we'll give you the link, but that's a place you can go and expand on the type of input that you've provided during the meeting. And you don't have to participate in the meeting to take advantage of the online input activity. We set it up so that anyone who's interested and wants to provide input on the plan can do so. So we'll get that link in the chat box in just a moment for you. And we'll provide it later on as well. But I just wanted to mention that. Okay, enough of the preliminaries. Let's get on to our first section of our workshop this evening. And our first section is going to be the overview of the Urban Water Management Plan update, what it is, why, when, how. It's going to be a little bit of an expansion of what we just saw in the video. And for this presentation, we're going to hear from Katrina and then Lauren. All right, take it away.
Thank you, Joan. Next slide, please. So in general, the Urban Water Management Plans, or UWMP for short, are valuable long-term documents in which urban water suppliers evaluate their supplies and demands to ensure that they have adequate supplies to meet both existing and future water needs in a sustainable manner. Next slide. These plans are required by the Urban Water Management Planning Act, which applies to all California water suppliers with either 3,000 or more service connections or selling at least 3,000 acre-feet per year of water. And they're required to be updated every 5 years to continue to provide a framework for ensuring the reliability of water supplies and identifying potential shortfalls over a minimum 20-year planning horizon. The due date for the 2020 Urban Water Management Plan is July 1st, 2021. Next slide. So the law actually requires specific content to be included in the plan. And I wanted to briefly go over the main topics that we will be addressing in the 2020 plan. To start, we're required to describe water use by sector, and that will include projections over the planning horizon, which for the SCV Water plan will go through 2050. Similarly, the plan must describe all water sources, both existing and planned for the future. And those would include sources like imported water, surface water, recycled water, and groundwater. We'll also describe any water quality issues that could exist that might impact those water supplies. And then with that information taken together, we'll be able to evaluate the reliability of water supplies in all hydrologic year types. And those year types include normal and critically dry years, as well as a 5-year drought period. Next slide. In the last 2 urban water management plans, we determined what water use reduction targets were supposed to be achieved by 2020. And in this 2020 plan, we'll now be reporting on actual compliance. A water shortage contingency plan is also required again for the 2020 plan, with some minor additional requirements. In addition, demand management measures that have been implemented and are planned for implementation will be described. And a new requirement this year is analysis of the energy intensity of water operations within the SCV water system. Now I'll turn it over to Loren Everett for some more details on the legislative updates since 2015.
Thanks, Katrina. Hi, everyone. Good evening. Okay, I'm going to present the new legislation that's guiding the changes to the agency's 2020 urban plan, as well as briefly touch upon how it will impact future urban plans and the water shortage contingency plan that Katrina mentioned, which will be a topic of a future workshop. It's typical for the legislature to impose new requirements on urban water suppliers via the urban plan, and it was done in 2015, it was done in 2010, and previous cycles. Therefore, each urban plan cycle has to adapt and respond to new requirements, all of which are described in the California Water Code, with guidance from DWR in its draft Urban Water Management Plan Guidebook. So starting off on the left, Assembly Bill 1668 and Senate Bill 606. This is a legislation that provides for the Making Water Conservation a California Way of Life, which you probably heard about. This aims at guiding long-term improvements in water conservation and drought planning in the state. One of the main provisions in this legislation is the requirement by the state to establish water use objectives and long-term standards for efficient water use that apply to urban retail water suppliers. And it's comprised of indoor residential water use, outdoor residential water use, commercial, industrial, and institutional irrigation with dedicated meters, and water loss. These objectives in large part are still being developed by the state, and so the agency will have to report on the compliance with the objectives in future urban plans. However, in this 2020 urban plan, we'll have to describe the demand management measures that the agency will utilize to achieve those objectives. In the middle is legislation that you know very well. I'm sure this stakeholder group is actively involved. This is the legislation that enacted statewide standards intended to protect groundwater elevations, quality, and surface water groundwater interactions. You know this as the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act of 2014. So these bills require the establishment of a groundwater sustainability agency, which has happened for those groundwater basins deemed medium and high priority, and the development of a groundwater sustainability plan. Urban plans, how this relates to the 2020 plan, the urban plan must utilize the findings of the GSP to support the groundwater analysis in the plan itself. However, the scheduling for the two plans is unfortunately, it's mismatched, which the state understands. The agency's GSP will be completed by January 2022, and like Katrina said, the urban plan due date is July 1, 2021. Therefore, we're going to coordinate with the GSA as appropriate and incorporate information as it's available. The important thing is that we describe in the urban plan how we are going to be coordinating with the GSA. And then lastly, Senate Bill 664 requires an urban water supplier to include within its plan a seismic risk assessment and mitigation plan to assess the vulnerability of each of the various facilities of a water system, and then to mitigate those vulnerabilities. And that will have to be updated with each urban plan cycle. Next slide, please. In addition, we'll have to document, like Katrina said, compliance with SB X7-7, which requires a 20% reduction in per capita water use by 2020. Each agency has a 2020 target that was initially established in the 2010 urban plan based on historical population and production. To document compliance, we'll compare the actual 2020 water use against the target and report it in the plan. I wanted to note that the retail agencies met their 2015 interim goal, and that was reported in the 2015 urban plan. But this time it's going to look a little bit different as the agency has merged its wholesale and retail entities. In fact, the whole plan is going to look a little bit different as we provide information for the agency as a whole and not by specific retailers. But getting back to the SB X7-7, we'll be calculating and determining compliance for the agency as a whole pursuant to the methodology provided by DWR. And current data shows that the agency is projected to meet this 2020 target as well. And as I mentioned briefly, with the Making New California Conservation a Way of Life, the state is going to adopt a water loss standard that urban water suppliers will have to comply with and document the compliance in the urban plan. However, these standards won't go into effect until June 2022. The urban plan has to describe the methodology for how the agency will prepare the new requirement to develop an annual water supply and demand assessment, which will be due beginning June 1st, 2022. This evaluation will be described in the agency's water shortage contingency plan, which will be a separate document from the urban plan this time and a little bit more robust, but submitted with the urban plan. DWR is still developing guidance on how agencies should go about developing this annual water supply and demand assessment, and they plan on having a training session in early December. And then lastly, a drought risk assessment is needed and is new requirement to evaluate the reliability of each of the agency's water supply sources over a 5-year consecutive year drought period under a variety of water shortage conditions. And this is done on an annual basis for 2021 to 2025, which is really interesting because usually with the urban plans, you look at 5-year cycles out to 2050, but this time the state is saying, hey, how are you going to do for the next 5 years? And what are your supplies and demands going to look like? Next slide, please. In urban plans, they're used in a variety of ways. There's lots of other uses for them. They're reference documents for water supply assessments and verifications, which developers and land use agencies prepare to evaluate the water supply for a particular project. They're used to support the water supply and demand analyses within a CEQA document. And as mentioned before, they have to be closely coordinated with the GSPs. And even more importantly, they really help to identify opportunities to augment and diversify an agency's water supply portfolio. Every 5 years, this plan provides the agency the opportunity to take a closer look at its long-range supply and demand so it can evaluate changing conditions like climate change and determine where changes need to be made, if any at all. And then lastly, an urban plan deemed compliant by DWR, we have to turn these in and they review all of them. It allows the agency to maintain its eligibility for grant and loan funding. And now I'm going to turn it back over to Joan to talk about the role of public involvement.
Excellent. Thanks so much. All right, on this slide, you see a diagram that maps out the public involvement opportunities. And so we are having 3 public workshops. The first is the one we're having now in November, and then the other 2 will happen in February and March. And at the February and March workshops, we're going to dive more into technical aspects of the Urban Water Management Plan update, and the project team will be sharing some of the research and analysis that they are doing. It's going to be in a working form because it's you know, nothing's going to be final yet. They're going to be still like kind of midway through their analyses, but it's but the benefit of that is that they will be able to hear your input as they are providing incremental research to you. And then they'll be able to consider your input as they keep moving through and preparing the plan. So we have the 3 public workshops, and then we get to April and May, the official public review period will occur where the draft Urban Water Management Plan will be distributed for public review and comment. And then we will have a public hearing in April and one in May. And the comments received during the public review period in April will be considered by the project team, and then they will report to the Board of Commissioners, the SCV Water Board of Commissioners, or Board of Directors. The project team will report how they responded and considered the public comments that has been received. And also, this all has to be done by June. So SCV has to submit the completed plan in June of 2021. So it's a pretty quick timeline, which is why we've been so careful to map it out the way we have. We want to pause now after our first workshop, after our first section, to see what questions you have about the Urban Water Management Plan update. There might have been some information in the slides that you want to know more about, or maybe just have a question. And so we're asking that you use the chat box, and we'll be monitoring the chat box for your questions, and then the project team will answer questions. So we're going to pause just a moment to give you a chance to type in questions. And also, if you are joining by phone, if you push *9 on your phone, that will give us a message that you have a question, and we can then unmute you, and you can talk to us and let us know your question. Okay, I'm just gonna give one more moment in case we get some questions in the chat box so far. Okay, looks like someone had a question about the graph. If you're able to let us know in the chat box which graph. Okay, we've got a question that's just come in. Okay, this is a good question. This is about the timing of the GSP, the Groundwater Sustainability Plan, and the Urban Water Management Plan. So this kind of goes back to what I was saying in the beginning, that SCV has experienced this convergence of important planning processes in 2020 and 2021. So the question is, has the state provided any guidance regarding the timing of the GSP and the Urban Water Management Plan? You mentioned coordination, but once the GSP is done, would the Urban Water Management Plan need to be amended to reflect that outcome?
Sure, so I'll take Matt's question. And that's a very good question. From what we've seen, no. The urban plan may need to be amended for other reasons, like meeting those water use objectives that I mentioned for residential indoor use and outdoor use. And so there's talk about potential amendments before the 2025 urban plan cycle. But what we know for now is that any information that comes from the GSP will get built into the 2025 urban plan.
Okay, good. And so I had a comment that the process, the public involvement process chart was hard to see. So let's go back to that if we could. Okay, I know it's on my screen when it first came in, it was a little pixelated and blurry. So hopefully this is easier to see this time around. Okay, I'm getting a message that it's clear. So just to recap in case, because this is important information that I want to make sure everyone has. So there will be 3 public workshops for the Urban Water Management Plan update in November, February, and March. And then public review of the draft plan happens in April. And the first public hearing where the board, where the SCV board will consider approval of the plan happens in April. And then a final action will be taken in May. And then the plan goes to the State of California Department of Water Resources in June. Okay, so that looks like all the questions we have for now. So let's go to the input activity that we have. And we're going to use the chat function for this as well. And I hope all of you participate in this, because this is the kind of input that the team really needs as we're beginning this process. We want to know from community members and customers and other stakeholders about what you think is particularly important for the team to consider as they start this process for updating the plan. So we're asking that you type into the chat box your answer to this question about what are the water supply issues, ideas, and questions that should be considered. And what we'll do as you send in your input is we have this fun whiteboard with sticky notes. We're going to put that on the screen in just a moment. What we're going to do is we're going to capture just some key topics from everyone's contributions to this question. and we're going to make notes of it on the sticky notes, so that we all get a visual of what people are saying. And so we've got people behind the scenes working on this, and but I want you to know that even though only a couple of words actually get written on the sticky notes, we'll be recording and documenting all of the notes we have in the chat box. Okay, this is great. So we're starting to get answers coming in right now. So we're just going to pause for a couple of minutes and give everyone a chance to get an answer in. Thanks whoever's doing that. Make them a little bigger so we can read them. All right, I'm just going to report on what we've got on the whiteboard right now. Again, we know that this is just a quick opportunity to provide input, but there is an opportunity and a way for you to provide more input on the website, and so we hope you take advantage of that. And Jack or Allie, if you could provide the link for the online input portal, that would be great. If you could just put that in the chat box for everyone. So you can see some of the topics we have on the whiteboard right now. So these are the types of things that people are saying they want to make sure the team considers in this update. So one topic is indirect potable reuse. Another topic is how will the plan incorporate climate variability, how are conservation and efficiency targets determined. PFAS came up in someone's response. The question of how much water will what's the annual increase in water that's going to be needed? That's an important topic for the plan for sure. And another topic is utilization of the current outfall, the water outfall from the sanitation district. How can that be used for reclaimed water uses? And there's a comment about stormwater capture, and will stormwater be addressed in the urban water management plan? So as we go through the meeting, please feel free to continue to provide input, and we'll get those topics on the whiteboard. I think we can go ahead now to our second section. We're going to have another presentation on water supply characteristics, and then we'll pause again for Q&A on this presentation itself. And Sarah Flory is going to give this presentation. She is the SCV Water Project Manager for the Urban Water Management Plan update.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me okay, Joan?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I'm going to go through our water supply characteristics. Next slide, please. So the fundamental purpose of preparing an urban water management plan is really assessing our water service reliability, or showing that we can meet the water needs of our customers with water supplies under any kind of condition we face. So what are water supply characteristics? Imagine that this barrel represents Santa Clarita's water demand each year. And then the rainbow buckets represent our different water sources, which can be used to meet this demand. The more colored buckets, the more diverse our water supply is, or the more options we have to fill the barrel each year. We know that California has extremely variable weather year to year, and no matter what type of year, wet, dry, or somewhere in between, it's SCV Water's responsibility to make sure that barrel is full, and we do that by using different variations of our water supplies, or the rainbow buckets. So having a reliable supply really means that no matter what conditions we encounter, Santa Clarita's water demands are always going to be met. So this presentation is really meant to help you get familiar with our different water supply sources and how they're used to meet our demands in different conditions. Next slide, please. So I'm going to go over real quick what an acre foot is, because when I talk about water amounts, I don't talk in gallons, I talk in acre feet. So just in case you heard me saying acre feet, I wanted you to know what it was. So an acre foot of water is a football field size area of water with 1 foot of 1 foot water deep. It's basically 325,000 gallons, or enough water for 2 families of 4 for an entire year. Next slide, please. So where does our water come from in Santa Clarita? We actually have a pretty diverse water supply portfolio. We have some of our water sources coming from outside of Santa Clarita, which we call imported water, like our state water project and our banking programs, while we have other sources that are local resources, like our groundwater and our recycled water. Next slide, please. So we're going to start with the state water project. This is imported water. It's one of SCV Water's main sources. The state water project is really the backbone of the state's water supply delivery system. Some of you may have seen the giant concrete river of water that flows next to I-5 as you travel north through the Central Valley. Well, that's the state water project aqueduct. And the state water project is operated by the Department of Water Resources, and it serves about 2/3 of the state with high quality water. So in Santa Clarita, this water supply, oh, go back, thank you. In Santa Clarita, this water supply meets about half of our demands each year, but it's extremely variable. It changes with the amount of rain we get or snow we get. It changes with pumping capacities in the Delta, changes with water quality and environmental regulations. So overall, SCV Water is contracted to get about 95,200 acre feet of this water a year. So that's the max amount we can get if it's available. But like I said, it fluctuates. So as an example, in 2020, because it was dry, we only got about 20% of our total contracted amount, which is about 19,000 acre feet. So that's one thing to note about this water supply. Another thing is that in wet years, when we have surplus water from this supply, we can utilize this water for some of our water banking programs. Next slide, please. So we're going to do a quick pop quiz. How many miles long is the California aqueduct along Interstate 5? So if everyone can just put their guesses in there and see what everyone thinks, and then I'll give you the answer in a...
Yeah, this is a good question. When I answered it, I was really off.
Okay. We good to close the poll? So the answer is 444 miles long. And just another side note, it can take anywhere from 14 to 75 days for the water to travel the length of the aqueduct. So it's very dependent on the demand and time of year as well. So the water comes from a long way to get to us. Next, oh, I gotta make this pull away on my screen. 1 second. Okay. So every 2 years, the Department of Water Resources puts together what they call the Delivery Capability Report. And basically this is just a real fancy report that gives agencies information on how much we can expect to get from our state water project supply today and moving into the future. And they factor in things like regulations, operational constraints, environmental challenges, and then climate change threats to let us know how much we can rely on this source into the future. So as one of our main sources for Santa Clarita, this information is vital for us for planning, because based on what this report says, we can then take that information and assess what other resources might be needed to make sure Santa Clarita, we can meet all of Santa Clarita's water demands as the state water project supply reliability changes. Next slide, please. So this graph is an example of how our state water supply fluctuates. The blue bars represent the amount that's allocated to us each year, and you can see it goes from each year is 2000 to 2020. The orange line represents the maximum amount that we can get in 1 year, so that's our contracted amount. And then the purple line shows us the average amount estimated by the Department of Water Resources Delivery Capability Report. So somewhere kind of in the middle, high middle. One thing to note is that our demands don't fluctuate as drastically as our supplies do. So in years like 2014, when we had our lowest allocation ever, SCV Water really had to make up the lack of state water project supplies with other sources to make sure we meet our demands. So this just highlights the importance of our urban water management planning. Next slide, please. Next, we're going to talk about our water banking programs. Again, this is an imported water supply, so it's coming from outside of Santa Clarita. And our water banks are typically located in the Central Valley where there's large agricultural areas. The right-hand side, there's an image that kind of explains what a water bank, how a water bank program works. Basically, there's an area of land where we can deliver large amounts of water into recharge basins, and we can that water will then percolate or absorb through the soil into the groundwater aquifer below. So it acts kind of like a storage tank underground for us. And then in dry years, when we need to get that water back, we can utilize those extraction wells to pull the water out of the ground and deliver it to Santa Clarita. So you might be thinking, why do we need to do this? We live right next to a giant reservoir, Passaic Lake. Well, Santa Clarita only actually has about 2% capacity in this reservoir, and we only utilize that space for emergencies only. So we don't really have a large reservoir that we can store water in, and so we have to utilize water banking programs to really maximize our state water project supplies when we have surplus water in wet years. So, and also it's really critical for us to use this banking program water in dry years when our imported water supplies from our state water project supplies are lower. Next slide, please. So SCV Water participates in 2 different banking programs in the Central Valley. We have a total storage of about 140,000 acre feet stored underground right now. And then we are allowed to recover about 15,000 acre feet a year when needed in dry years. Next slide, please. Next, we're going to quickly review what a water purchase agreement is. And basically, it's just that. It's an interagency agreement to purchase water from another agency each year. And SCV Water has one long-term water purchase agreement for 11,000 acre feet of non-project water each year for 30 years. When I say non-project water, that means that this water is not associated with the state water project. It's actually from the Kern River. And the benefit of that is that this water does not fluctuate like the state water project water does, depending on the year type. So we get 11,000 acre feet of water no matter what each year. Another benefit of this water is that we can sell it when we don't need it in wet years. So we don't have to use it, but it's critical for us to meet our demands in dry years. Next slide, please. Next, we're going to go through groundwater. This is a great visual for groundwater supplies in Santa Clarita. Groundwater, again, is kind of like banking programs. It's water stored underground in large pools that we call aquifers. And the surface water from rivers or rain can percolate into the groundwater aquifer through different soils, which act as natural filtration system. And then we can pump it out of the ground when we need it for municipal and agricultural use. Santa Clarita has two different types of aquifers. We have a deep Saugus aquifer that you see in this, this image that looks kind of like a bowl. And then we have a more shallow alluvial aquifer seen in the top left-hand corner. It's a much more shallow aquifer that runs along, kind of follows the river system. Next slide, please. So your next pop quiz, how much usable groundwater is available from the Saugus aquifer? And the photo that we're showing you here, the black outline kind of shows us our SCV water boundary. We've got the dark brown represents our Saugus formation. So you can see there's groundwater under, our deep groundwater is pretty much covers most of the service area, and then the alluvial shallow aquifer in the light yellow. So how much usable groundwater is available from our deep Saugus aquifer? Okay, why don't we close the polls here? The answer is over 1 million acre feet is actually available from the deep Saugus aquifer. So we have so much water, you would never think, in Santa Clarita, right under our feet. Next slide, please. So groundwater, again, is our local water source. It makes up about half the water that we use an average year in Santa Clarita to meet our demands. It's vital source for us in dry years and emergency because it's a local source. Generally, we tend to lean on this source a bit more in dry years because it doesn't fluctuate, kind of like some of our imported surface water supplies. And then we back off of these supplies in wet years to make sure that those groundwater supplies can recover. Though the soils may act as a natural filtration system, some of our groundwater still does require some treatment depending on water quality regulations. And some people may be recently hearing a lot about PFAS and PFOA contaminants in the groundwater. So these are examples where the groundwater will need treatment installed at each facility in order for us to utilize that water and meet all of our water quality standards. Overall, our local groundwater is an extremely precious resource and one of our main water supplies locally. So we really have to make sure we manage it carefully to make sure we have it to use in the future and we can depend on it. So to do so, we utilize groundwater management and operating plans to make sure that we have safe pumping amounts dependent on the different type of year. So it kind of lays out a balance and regulates a balance for us on our imported water supplies and groundwater supplies to make sure that we're not using too much of one or the other. These planning documents are currently being updated through the work of the SCV Groundwater Sustainability Agency, which Loren mentioned, and we will be coordinating with them again to make sure we get all their updated analysis to incorporate in our urban planning efforts. Next slide, please. Next, we're going to talk a little bit about recycled water. So recycled water is basically water used a second time. It's a local water supply. Starts out as indoor water use, like washing dishes, showers, laundry. It moves through our sewer system and gets treated at the reclamation plants. And then it's either released into the Santa Clara River or it's used again as recycled water. It is a year-round supply, as we all use indoor water year-round. And then we move the recycled water through the purple piping system to use for irrigation at parks and street medians. Next slide, please. So in Santa Clarita, we started using recycled water in 2003. We currently reuse about 475 acre feet a year, and then the rest goes back to the ground, to the river, and goes back into the groundwater. The majority of reclaimed water is actually going to the river at this point. Unfortunately, because we didn't utilize this flow historically. Actually, can you go back a slide? Sorry. We didn't utilize this flow historically. The surrounding ecosystem has become dependent on this water source. So we can't just use it all now that we want to use it. We have an ecosystem that's dependent on it. The map here shows our recycled water distribution system projects throughout the valley, and they're focused mainly on the west end of the service area because that's where the two reclamation plants are located, the Saugus and the Valencia water reclamation plants. And then the agency is currently moving forward with design of their phase 2 recycled water infrastructure, which is funded through grants, which will deliver new recycled water supplies to places like Hal Arts and College of the Canyons for irrigation. And then the urban plan is really going to lay out our current recycled water use and how we intend to increase this supply moving forward. Next slide, please. So how do we increase our use of recycled water in the future if our groundwater ecosystem is now dependent on this supply? We can utilize our new development. So new development in Santa Clarita is going to bring more reclaimed water that we intend on capturing and then using as recycled water before it gets to the river. And we refer to that new recycled water supply as a new drop. And we've created this, we think, simplified schematic, which kind of outlines this plan. So basically, on the left-hand side, you have two pipes going into the water treatment plant. The top pipe represents our new development or indoor water use from our new development, and then the bottom pipe represents our existing indoor water use. Both pipes go through the water treatment plant, and the existing or the bottom pipe then gets split. Most of the water goes to the Santa Clarita River, and then we use that 475 acre feet a year of recycled water. Now you'll see the top pipe goes through the water treatment plant, and all of the water coming out of the water treatment plant will then be utilized as new recycled water use. So that's how we intend on increasing our use of recycled water into the future, by tapping into that new development water that hasn't gone to the river yet. So lastly, I just want to circle back to the barrel and all those rainbow buckets. We've gone through a lot of different water supply characterizations for SCV Water, and this graph kind of shows you how we use different buckets to meet demands in different year types. So the graph shows you a bar for the wet year, an average year, and a dry year. You'll see that in a wet year, we tend to get a lot more state water project water because there's snow and rain out there. So we lean on that source a little bit more in wet years. We still utilize a decent amount of groundwater, and then we have our little recycled water at the top. In an average year, it's kind of split 50-50 between our state water project supplies in blue and our groundwater in red. And we may or may not use our water purchase agreement water, depending on if we need it or not. And the most important one is our dry year. You'll see that our state water project supplies generally get pretty small when it's a dry year. We lean a little heavily on our groundwater supplies because there are local supplies. We definitely will utilize our water purchase agreement water. And then this is where we start using our water banking and exchange programs in the orange. Next slide. So overall, the urban plan is going to assess our water service reliability to show that we can meet the needs of our customers in all these varying conditions. And I'd be happy to answer any questions. If anybody has any.
Yeah, Sarah, thanks. You really laid it out well, all the different sources of water that SCV utilizes to provide that reliable service to the customers. State water projects, groundwater, recycled water, water banking. That was a lot of information. And so we do have time reserved right now for questions, and we've got a couple. And one of the questions, if you could just clarify the source of the estimate for the total Saugus aquifer, the amount of groundwater in that aquifer that you gave, if you could just provide the source of it.
Oh yes, I have to remember the name of that report. I may have to ask Dirk for help on this.
It's from a report that was prepared by Richard Slade. And I can't recall the, Richard Slade, who was a hydrogeologist, done a lot of work in our groundwater basin. And probably should also mention the fact that we have, or that is an attribute of the aquifer itself with respect to how much water exists in the aquifer. It's not to say that our plan suggests that we pump all of that water or out. We have to have well capacity in order to do that. Currently, we pump about 10,000 acre feet or so of water out of the Saugus on a typical year. The groundwater operating plan, which Sarah referred to, contemplates additional wells being constructed and extracting up to 35,000 acre feet out of the Saugus aquifer during very dry years when our imported supplies are significantly curtailed. So I hope that puts a little bit more context around the resource. It's a valuable resource to us, but there are constraints with respect to what we can take now and what future plans are with respect to pulling water out of that resource.
Thanks, Dirk. And because this plan addresses so many different topics, we have various team members available to answer questions. So, Dirk, can you, just so people know, can you introduce yourself and give us and let us know your role at SCV Water?
Yes, I'm the Director of Water Resources at the agency.
Okay, thanks so much.
Thank you.
Okay, another question we have that came up is, how will COVID-19 affect the plan?
Well, that is a really great question. I guess I can answer that in a couple ways. As far as planning, we are supposed to get the plan completed by July 1st. It's a legislated due date, so there's no changes to that because we're in a pandemic, unfortunately. So we will get that plan completed. There's no extensions allowed. As far as water use goes, you know, so far, I think there's still analysis that needs to be done, whether or not we've had more water demand because of the stay-at-home order in Santa Clarita and everywhere. I don't think we've really seen many fluctuations. I know we did see some high numbers in February, but I think that was more dependent on the weather because we had such a dry hot February. So I don't know if we've seen changes in water use because of COVID, but that is something that will be looked at as we go through all the data for 2020.
Okay, thanks for that. Another question that we have is, do we utilize excess water to recharge our aquifer?
We do not utilize excess water from like our state water project, like our imported water. We don't have a system in place currently to recharge our local aquifers, but that is something that we're looking at for future projects to expand and recharge our local aquifers with that source so that we can bring it to our local groundwater basin.
Okay. And another question, would more storage capacity help us to save wet year state water project water for dry years? Similar question, but just a little bit different.
Similar question. That's a really good question. So when you say storage capacity, yes, more local storage capacity would definitely help us save our wet year state water project water for dry years. But when you're talking about utilizing large amounts and acre feet of water, you really are talking about reservoirs. So more storage tanks really aren't going to be large enough to help us save that water for dry years. More the groundwater recharge projects would give us the larger capacity of water to be able to store that excess or surplus state water project water for dry years. So we need to use our big tanks underground for that.
Another question that has come in related to climate change and the Urban Water Management Plan update. And I'm going to hold that question because our next presentation and Q&A portion is focused on climate change. And so, so I think we'll just hold on to that until we get there.
Sounds good.
Okay. Let me just see if there's anything else that we want to catch right now. Oh, we had one of the pop quiz questions was about the state water project. And someone asked how many days to get the water.
Okay, so the to get the water, it ranges from 14 to 75 days. It takes for it to travel from the delta down to the southern end of the aqueduct. So it's really dependent on time of year. So there's a lot more demand in the summertime, so the water tends to travel faster because they're moving more water. And then it may come slower because there's a lot less demand because there's no irrigation use in the south, so or less irrigation use.
Yeah, that's an incredible range. But thanks for explaining the variability. Well, let's go on to our third section of our workshop. And Sarah's going to present on this again. And we're now going to move to discussion about the role of climate change in the Urban Water Management Plan update.
Okay, well, next slide, please. Let's just jump right in. So we're going to go through what is climate change, talk a little bit about climate models. I'll give you a little background on climate change, what's predicted as far as Santa Clarita Valley, and then how we incorporate climate change within the urban plan. Next slide, please. So there is a distinction between weather and climate change. So weather is what happens today, tomorrow, next week, next year. It's sunny, it's warm, it's raining. Overall, the year was drier or colder. But when you're talking about climate change, you're really talking about significant changes over extended periods of time. So like temperature or precipitation changes over 30-year averages and globally, not just locally. Next slide, please. So climate models are very sophisticated tools that we use to assess future climate conditions. So they give us projected potential future scenarios to utilize for planning. And with that, we can evaluate what impacts there may be to our water supplies, our demands, and water quality. And when we're talking about climate change, the primary variables that affect water resources planning are really sea level rise, air temperature, and precipitation patterns. Next slide, please. So we've talked in the last presentation about California's extreme climatic variability. We get extremes annually and seasonally. With climate change, we're seeing that all these extremes are going to be much more intensive. It's going to affect both our water use as well as our water supplies, and it could potentially jeopardize our reliability over short and long-term periods of time. So as water resource planners, it's critical for us to look at these scenarios and make sure we adapt and mitigate potential impacts to our supplies so that we can make sure we meet our demands no matter what conditions are thrown our way into the future. Climate change analysis in planning, though, is not something new. This is a list of local plans that actually, local and statewide plans that already incorporate climate change analysis within these plans. So things like the Upper Santa Clara River Integrated Regional Water Management Plan. You also have the City of Santa Clarita's Climate Action Plan. And then statewide, California's created the 4th Climate Change Assessment, which breaks the state up into regional areas and focuses on potential effects per region. So this is just an example of some of the plans that are out there. Next slide, please. So this is a graph of how climate change could potentially affect Santa Clarita. It was generated using the CalAdapt tool, which combines climate model data with historical observed data. This graph represents historical and projected max average annual air temperature in Santa Clarita. And that's a mouthful. So what that means is that it basically takes the highest temperature each day and averages it out for the entire year to equal 1 point for each year. The blue line represents our observed historical data, which goes through 2005, and that's what was available with the tool, so not trying to avoid anything. The dark orange line shows us an average of modeled projections for a higher emissions scenario, and then the gray line shows us an average modeled projections for a lower emissions scenario. And then I added the light orange line in the middle, which is actual data from our local CIMIS station at our Rio Vista plant. So it's a weather station there. What you can see is basically the temperatures are projected to trend higher as we move into the future. And then modeled projections aren't far off from what our actual data is showing right now. So potentially we're looking at a 10-degree increase by mid-century and potentially 20 or higher degree increase by the end of the century. Next slide, please. So where are we vulnerable in Santa Clarita? So with water supply, when we're talking about less snowpack, that could potentially impact our imported water supplies and reduce them quite significantly. When we're talking about less rain locally or large flooding situations locally from atmospheric rivers, bringing everything all at once, this could change our natural recharge of our groundwater locally. So in the urban plan, we need to address, we need to mitigate potential changes in our water supply, and so we're going to look at enhancing our water supplies. How can we enhance those water supplies? So local recharge projects, like some of the questions brought up just from the last presentations. How can we enhance our local recharge? How can we locally enhance our recharge in our groundwater? Sorry. We're also going to look at enhancing our recycled water programs, and then potentially how can we enhance our banking programs, because those are the programs we can lean on as these variable conditions happen. Next slide, please. Water demands. So as we get warmer temperatures, we're going to see people using more water. It just happens. We've got more evaporation. We could potentially have longer growing seasons. So people are going to use more water as the temperatures increase and our seasons get In the urban plan, we're not only going to need to factor in growth for the area developing, but we're also going to need to look at how the water use patterns could change. We're going to factor in conservation programs and plumbing code changes to make sure that the water we are using, we're using it efficiently so that we can meet demands and stretch our supplies further. And then we're going to also look at prolonged drought risk. So what would happen if we experience an extreme drought conditions for 5 years in a row? Next slide, please. And then we get to water quality. So sea level rise. You don't really think that being Santa Clarita, how could we be affected by sea level rise? Well, our imported water supply actually goes right through the California Delta. So as sea level rises, our imported supply could potentially get increased chlorides and bromides because there might be more salt that's coming into that supply, which may require increased treatment locally. When we're talking about decreased precipitation, you could have higher contaminant loads to our local streams or turbidity loads to our local streams, which could change water quality in our groundwater. So in the urban plan, we're really going to look at water quality and how it affects the reliability of our supplies. And we're going to address how we can mitigate these issues to make sure we reduce these potential impacts so we can still lean on these water sources when we need them. This could also include partnering in programs with the state as far as sea level rise goes, or focusing on local programs. Next slide. So that's kind of just a quick intro to climate change. We are going to be following up on this topic in the second workshop, I believe, and giving you a little more detailed information about what we're finding in our plan, maybe some of the mitigation programs that we're thinking about including in that. But I just wanted to give you a quick update on that and just a little intro to how it will be included in our urban plan.
Thank you, Sarah. Can you all, I had to change to my headset. Can you all hear me? Because I had some background noise going.
Yes.
It's good? Okay, great. All right, thanks. That's an important part of this planning effort for sure. And I want to go back now to the questions that we had from a participant about climate change. And the question is, it was noted that the State Water Project Delivery Capability Report considers climate change. In dry years, the Santa Clarita Valley Water Agency relies more on the water banks and purchase agreements. Are these sources also affected by climate change?
That is a really great question. I think every source is vulnerable to climate change impacts, but those two sources specifically may not be as much. One with the water banking programs, you know, water banks are kind of protected like groundwater because they're under the ground, so there's not going to be changes in evaporation happening when it gets hotter and things like that. So there may be less impacts to the water banks specifically. As far as our water purchase agreement goes, you know, that is an agreement that basically guarantees us 11,000 acre feet a year. So even if it were affected by climate change, because of our agreement, they have to give us that much water every year. So they would have to kind of mitigate those impacts and make sure they meet the agreement requirements, at least through the end of our agreement, which I believe goes to 2036.
Okay. Good, thanks for that answer. We do have some time remaining to take more questions on the climate change component of the workshop. And again, you can type the questions into the chat box and then we'll pull them up from there. And at this point, I think we'll go ahead and if we can certainly take questions about climate change, but if you have other questions that have come up regarding the other presentations in this evening's workshop, we can take those right now too. All right, we've got a question here related to climate change. Should we anticipate new state of California standards in response to climate change?
That is a really good question. Part of the urban plan does require us to attempt as much as we can to anticipate state regulations. I know whether that be climate change or water quality regulations. So, and Loren, please add if you have anything. I think we'll do as much as we can to anticipate that, but I think that we also need to make sure we look at our water supplies more specifically and the impacts that they have on that prior to, worrying about meeting regulations that we don't know are there yet. I assume they will come, but that's kind of the benefit also of updating the plan every 5 years, is that as these regulations happen, we'll be able to address them as well. So.
I would agree, Sarah. Yeah, I mean, we're already seeing it with the Making Conservation a California Way of Life legislation. It's coming down the pipe. So just the way with California works, we're probably going to see some more standards related to climate change, and we just need to plow through the current legislation to get us to the next point.
We had a comment come in about reducing sprinkler runoff as a good water conservation effort. And water conservation efficiency is an important part of the Urban Water Management Plan update.
Yeah, definitely. As far as reducing sprinkler runoff, a lot of that is education and outreach. And I know our conservation program works really hard on making sure that they can spread that message. So that will definitely be one of the demand management measures that is addressed within the plan. Thank you.
Yeah, this is Matt Dickens, Resource Conservation Manager, and I just want to echo that comment. That is a good idea.
And Matt, while you're up, so Matt is also with SCV Water, and Matt is the project manager for the Water Shortage Contingency Plan, which is a component of the Urban Water Management Plan update, a very important component. And we'll be having a public meeting in January, late January, specifically focusing on the water shortage contingency planning effort. I don't see any additional questions. So I think we could go to our wrap-up slide. And again, I want to encourage you to stay plugged in, stay involved. We have a public meeting coming up for the Urban Water Management Plan in February and then March, and then we start the more formal public review and public hearing process in April, which may seem like a long ways off, but it's going to be here before we know it. And the input from the community is really vital so that the agency can customize this in ways that is going to be most effective to meet the needs of the community and the customers. So please stay involved. We'll go to the next slide. All right, so just some closing notes for you. Again, there is that input opportunity that's online, and you can just go to www.yourscvwater.com, Urban Water Management Plan, and you'll find the link. And that way you can provide more input than you've been able to here at the workshop in this virtual setting. Keep your radar up for information about the future public workshops for the Urban Water Management Plan update, but for the other planning efforts that SCV has underway. And like I said before, we are going to consolidate the communications about public involvement opportunities to make it as easy and efficient for all of you to participate. So I hope that you help us get the word out to other community members who want to be part of this process so they can get involved in a way that works for them. So on behalf of the project team, I just want to tell you all thank you. Thank you for participating, for sharing a portion of your evening here this evening. Thank you for being patient with a virtual meeting platform like this. You know, it's a little bit more challenging, but at the same time, we're so grateful that we have platforms like this so that we can continue to engage with community members and that the agency can continue to do the really important work that they need to do in front of them right now. With that, I will say good night, and I hope to see you at the next workshop.